gentle listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, the fortnightly podcast that brings you dark tales, both old and new, performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. This time we bring you something new. Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present Taylor Allgood's The Early Bird. My rocky relationship with sleep isn't entirely a curse. My condo overlooks the water, and a new sunrise awaits me each day. I watch the blackness soften into blue, then swirl into purples and oranges. Then, there it is, the pale sun casting out the dark. This day was as beautiful as any, but I dreaded it just the same. As partner at the firm, I wasn't usually questioned when I said I needed a personal day. This made it 20 years exactly since things fell apart. 20. I don't know what it is about multiples of 10 that makes them auspicious, but here we were. I'm the eldest of my siblings, and I admit I was a bully growing up. I would pinch Emma's sides in church and hide her stuffed animals from her, threatening to burn them. For the record, I never followed through on these threats. At the end of the day, my little sister was everyone's favorite, myself included. People always remarked to my parents on what a gorgeous girl she was. That gold-kissed hair, those green eyes. All agreed that she would grow up to be a knockout. But Emma never had a chance grow up. While I was a tease to her, I was an outright shit when it came to Warren, my younger brother. I terrorized him with ghost stories that gave him nightmares. Bloody Mary, Candyman, every one of them would send my poor brother into a fit. It was always Emma standing between us, curbing my more sadistic notions and coming to Warren's defense. I can't say why I was so cruel to my baby brother. At the time, I guess I just thought that's what big brothers were supposed to be like. And honestly, the kid was so damn fragile, you'd think he was made of porcelain. True, I was 4 years older than him, but it wasn't just his age. It was his nature. I remember him screaming and crying if the hall light wasn't left on at night, with the bedroom door left almost halfway open. He was 9, for Christ's sake. I stopped being afraid of the dark when I was 5. It wouldn't have been so infuriating if I didn't have to share a bedroom with the little bastard. I needed complete darkness to sleep. But Warren screamed and bawled with that piercing little voice until my exhausted parents gave him his way. By the time he was 10 and I was 14, I'd had enough. That's when I told him the story of the early bird. From then on, he never complained about facing the long nights in darkness. I slept in peace with the hall light off. The Only drawback was occasionally stirring in the wee hours of the morning to the sound of Warren's voice. He'd whimper the silly little phrase I'd taught him. Early bird, I am not your worm. That memory shames me now. He was more than a sensitive kid. He was a truly delicate, troubled soul. I understand that now. Whenever my parents and I visit him in the home, I feel a dark, churning guilt. I shouldn't have treated him like that. Maybe if I'd been the kind of big brother he could lean on, the kind he could talk to. The whole light situation had become unbearable. I'd already been through the classic ghouls that kids terrify each other with, and I needed something special, something different, something so chilling that Warren would shut up, stay quiet in the dark, and let me get some damn sleep. Strangely enough, it was Emma's sisterly concern that gave me the spark which eventually grew into the creature I dubbed the early bird. It was the middle of an autumn night. Warren had managed to fall asleep, wrapped in the golden glow emanating from the hallway. A nightlight simply wouldn't do. The little pussy had to have the hall light on. I, of course, lay wide awake. The glare shooting through our room may have given Warren the peace he needed, but for me it was torture. It didn't matter how deep I buried my head under pillows and covers. The bright light left me dreamless. I was 14, for God's sake. Hormones and growing pains dictated that I get some damned sleep. I peered at my little brother, enjoying his twin bed in an apparent deep REM cycle. Slowly I rose, silent as a shadow. I tiptoed into the hallway and gently switched the light off. The whimpering started before I was even under my covers. "Turn it back on," he demanded in his shaky little voice. I glared at his small figure, a dark shape in the blue-black darkness of the room. "No!" I hissed. "You're too old for this shit. Quit being such a pansy and go to sleep." "Turn it back on!" His voice was louder this time, cracking among the tears that were no doubt forming under his big, dumb eyes. "Shut up and go to sleep." "I can't," Warren cried. "Fine," I snapped at him. "Then shut up and stay awake. The light's not going back on. And if you go running to Mum and Dad about this, I swear I'll lock you in the broom closet again." Did I mention what a shit I was to my little brother? Our midnight squabble was broken by a beam of light shooting through the half-open door of our bedroom. The hall light was back on. "Oh, shit," I groaned internally. Mom or Dad had heard us. They were going to rip me a new one. But the form that darkened our doorway was decidedly smaller than either of my parents. Emma, it seemed, had been listening through the adjoining wall of her bedroom. She glared at me, wearing a pair of flannel pajama bottoms and a pink T-shirt with a red cloth heart stitched onto it. "Cut it out, Mike," she whispered firmly. 2 years younger than me, Emma always talked as if she were my elder. Like Mum and Dad, she always took Warren's side. "I can't get any damn sleep," I whispered back as loudly as I dared. I pointed an accusing finger at the quivering bundle of nerves they called my brother. "Dickless here needs to grow up and get over it." Emma rolled her eyes and regarded me with annoyance. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of Warren's bed. She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze before turning back to me. "It's your fault," she accused. You tell him all these scary stories about ghosts and monsters and serial killers. You made him watch that Hellraiser movie just 'cause you thought it was funny how much it freaked him out. No wonder he's afraid." She gave Warren a kiss on the forehead, along with a gentle command to go back to sleep. With me, she left a warning. Turn the light off again and she would tell Mom and Dad. My teeth clenched and my hands balled into fists once my sister left to return to her room. I was in a rage, not at her, but at how much smarter she had shown herself to be. Emma was right. All my stories, urban legends and twisted drawings of monsters with evil grins, had one commonality. They lived and thrived in the darkness. By charging me with responsibility for Warren's terror, Emma no doubt meant to elicit a change in my behavior. But, as I've already admitted, I was a hard-wired bully. No, I wouldn't stop tormenting my brother with monsters. I would create a new monster, one that thrived in the light, one that could only be dissuaded by shadow, one that would make Warren demand darkness and fear when night fled. I thought I was so damn clever. I pulled up to my parents' place, parking my Lexus at the end of the long gravel driveway. It felt good to get out and stretch my legs after the 6-hour inland drive it took to get to my hometown. I pulled my overnight bag from the passenger seat, then took a moment to drink in my childhood home. My folks live on several acres of property surrounded by woods. On the western side of the estate, there's a rocky ravine with a deep stream rushing along its bottom. As kids, we'd make the precarious climb down to the cool water when the summer sun got unbearable. Splashing, laughing, water balloon fights. We had a hell of a childhood there. At least until it washed down the stream with Emma's lifeless body. The drive to pick Warren up at the home was a quiet one. I'd exchanged some somber embraces with Mom and Dad, then we loaded up in the SUV. I caught my mother tearing up before we'd even made it off the property. In her hands, she clutched a small cloth heart. The little red heart was the one Mom had helped Emma sew onto her favorite pink t-shirt. She and Emma were always knitting and sewing and bedazzling things. At 12, Emma had started to lose interest in such activities. That pink shirt, however, was the one we would always remember her in. Emma slept in later than Warren and me on Saturdays, so it wasn't until about 10:30 in the morning that Mom noted she hadn't come down for breakfast yet. After a few loud calls from me to get her lazy butt up, Dad went up and investigated. Mom shook her head and muttered something about how she was getting to that age. Warren just stared at the cartoons playing on the TV. He'd been eerily quiet the whole morning. Dad returned downstairs with a look of tentative concern. Emma's room was empty, and she was nowhere to be found in the rest of the house. Concern turned to worry, and worry to panic. By the early afternoon, the police had been called, and a search party assembled. I stuck with Dad as we scoured the acres of woods and high grass that surrounded our isolated home. We were accompanied by friends, neighbors, and cops. Nightfall soon came, and our flashlights cast silver spears through the growing darkness. I'll never forget the pit that formed in my stomach when an officer signaled my dad and me to come back to the house. Somehow I knew. I just knew whatever they'd found, it wasn't good. The first thing I saw among the flashing red and blue lights was my uncle's face. As the police lights flickered across his watering eyes, he hugged my dad tightly and whispered something in his ear. Dad would have collapsed if my uncle weren't there to prop him up. My father screamed into the night, a sound I've never heard matched before or since. The crowd parted, and on a gurney beneath my sobbing mother lay Emma. She was soaking wet, her skin pallid almost to the point of blueness. Her tiny chest was still. The red heart stitched on her pink t-shirt neither rising nor falling. Then she was gone. A police officer had to pull my mother away as the black body bag was zipped shut over my sister's face, and her tiny form was lifted into the back of an ambulance. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to punch something. It was only then that I took notice of Warren. Oh, God. I went to him. He was shivering in the cool night air, tears rolling down his cheeks as they took our sister away. For maybe the first time in my life, I tried to comfort my little brother. I pulled off my coat and put it over his narrow shoulders. He'd always been scrawny. My coat seemed to swallow him up as he buried his face in my chest and sobbed. I hugged him tight, crying with him. Between sobs, Warren began to blubber out a set of words. At first, I didn't understand him, but he repeated them over and over again. Soon, they became clear, chilling my blood. They were the last true words he would speak before the silence wrapped around him with its dark fingers and clung tightly. Early bird, I am not your worm. The coroner determined a rough idea of what happened. Emma had suffered a blow to the front of her head. Its position indicated that she'd fallen face first down the ravine, a rock cracking into her skull as she rolled down the steep decline. Other contusions and cuts were consistent with her tumbling limply over stones and through brambles and bushes. Finally, her unconscious body reached the floor of the ravine, where the stream awaited her. We were assured that the blow to her head was severe enough to knock her unconscious instantly. She likely never felt the rest of the fall, never felt the pain and panic as she slid and spun down into the icy water. Had she landed in the stream face up, she might have even survived. But Emma had rolled into the water knocked out cold, with her nose and mouth submerged. Her limp, broken body couldn't respond as the water filled her lungs. The authorities made feeble attempts to console my parents. She didn't suffer, they insisted. Once she was knocked unconscious, that was it. She didn't feel the rest. There was no pain, no fear, no agony as the stream seeped down her windpipe and cut off her air supply. I hope they were right. No one could account for what Emma was doing out at the ravine that morning. The best explanation anyone could muster was a restless girl out for an early walk. Maybe she wanted to watch the sunrise. Through all of the chaos and pain swirling my family into the drain over the subsequent weeks, I was fixated on the words my now catatonic brother uttered when he saw our sister's corpse. Early bird, I am not your worm. By the time he was 13, Warren's fits and attempts at self-harm had made life at home untenable. His characteristic stillness and silence would be interrupted by explosions of psychosis. He'd scream gibberish at the ceiling as if tormented by some unseen creature crawling around above him. Tables would be flipped and dishes smashed. My parents' attempts to wrangle him were met with furious bites. It finally came to a head when my brother shattered a juice glass and used its jagged remains to try at opening his own throat. Dad managed to stop him, wrestling Warren to the ground and keeping pressure on the wound until the paramedics arrived. We almost lost him that day. Since then, he'd withered away in a mental health facility called simply the Home. It was upscale, as such institutions go. But all the gloss and morning Tai Chi classes in the beautifully manicured gardens couldn't conceal what it truly was. An asylum for broken, unmendable minds. A daily handful of colourful pills kept Warren's outbursts at bay. With the mania subdued, all that remained was a catatonic, disinterested spectre. He never seemed to gain weight, no matter how much they made him eat. His skeletal figure was crested with a mop of mousy brown hair that flopped over empty brown eyes. My stomach knotted at the prospect of seeing Warren in that place. It was a yearly torment. There he'd be, sitting in a chair next to one of the Home's larger windows. A caretaker would lead us over to him. He was always alone, isolating himself from the other patients in a pool of daylight. As always, Mom gently squeezed him by the shoulder. "Warren, honey, it's Mama." It seemed to take an eternity for my brother to acknowledge her presence. He turned his head and peered at Mom. One might think he was regarding a mild curiosity, intriguing but ultimately unfamiliar and unimportant. I'd gathered in the ride over that Mom and Dad had been to see him just a week before. Mom checked in on him over the phone daily. One of the staff would hold a receiver up to Warren's ear and Mom would chatter away, never getting a reply. Rhoda, the caretaker, stepped in. "Your family's come to see you, Warren," she intoned softly. "You're all going for a drive today." Rhoda was a motherly black woman in her mid-50s. Though she attended to a number of patients in the facility, she had a way of making my parents feel as though Warren was her only priority. "That's right, honey," my mother said. "Daddy's here, and look, even your brother came to see you." Warren lazily lifted his head to consider me. I couldn't read anything from that stony gaze. Our annual visit to Emma's gravesite proceeded without incident. My mother cried gently as she whispered prayers known only to her. She clutched at the cloth heart like it was a rosary. My father, stalwart in his stoicism, allowed only the barest hint of tears to escape. He held Warren by the arm. For his part, my brother just gazed off into the distance. Maybe he preferred the light dappling the encircling trees over studying my sister's gravestone. I found myself seething in that moment. She was our sister, damn it. Look at it. Look at her. I pushed these petty thoughts away. They were unfair. It was losing Emma that had put Warren in his current state. His world had ended with her. Now he elected to be an observer to life, never a participant. After returning my brother to Rhoda's care, we made our way back to the house. While Dad immediately set to pouring himself a Scotch rocks, Mum tried to persuade me to stay another day or two. I insisted that I had to get back to work. A lie. I had an army of young law school graduates who did 90% of the legwork and trembled in my presence. I could afford a few more days away from the firm. The truth was, as much as I loved my childhood home, its beauty was forever marred. Every step through the old house brought back memories of a family that was whole. A family that, while never perfect, was largely happy. The whole property was haunted by ghosts of the people who had been my brother and sister. The backyard was a mausoleum filled with summer days running through the sprinklers. The surrounding woods were catacombs, with games of cops and robbers sprinting round their leafy tunnels. And there was the stream. While Emma may lay buried in a proper cemetery, that frigid vein at the bottom of the ravine will forever be my sister's crypt to me. After my mother's attempts at persuasion failed, we ate a quiet dinner. Mom then retired to her romance novels as Dad sat vigil in front of the TV. Left to my own devices, I slung my bag over the shoulder and descended the stairs. The childhood bedroom that Warren and I shared had been left largely untouched. The same could not be said for Emma's room. A couple years after we lost my sister, a therapist convinced my parents that leaving the room as a pristine shrine to their dead daughter was not healthy. In her expert opinion, it created a space within the house where grief could only be wallowed in. A healthier way to process their pain would be to change the room and keep a few mementos as comforting totems in Emma's memory. Among my mother's choices was that little cloth heart. She swore that sometimes when she held it, she could feel it beating. 2 twin beds occupied the space that Warren and I shared for so many years. I tossed my bag on the one that had been mine. I appraised the room, my side covered with Led Zeppelin, Sabbath, and Pantera posters, Warren's with scale diagrams of the solar system and dinosaurs. I pulled a sketchbook from my old nightstand. Early in life, I was quite adept at drawing. Once I'd even entertained notions of becoming a comic book artist. The discoveries of sex and partying distracted me away from such interests once I entered high school. Flipping through the ghoulish images I'd committed to the sheets with charcoal, graphite, and ink, I couldn't help but laugh at myself. I thought I was so edgy back in those days. I worshipped the likes of H.R. Geiger, Edward Gorey, and, yes, Hot Topic's Messiah, Tim Burton. Hellish creatures were splayed across each page, macabre creations cobbled together from disparate anatomies snarled from the thick paper stock. I was constantly inventing new monsters, each more gruesome and provocative than the last. The sketches ended about 3/4 of the way through the book. There was a definitive halt to the abominations that sprung from my mind. The final drawing stared up at me in all its revolting glory. It was the early bird. When Warren first peeked over my shoulder and asked me about what I was drawing, I must have been in a trance to have lied so fluidly. The notes of Pink Floyd's Goodbye Blue Sky harmonized the eerie description I gave my little brother. Back in 1651, there was a rich lady who shamed the rest of the pilgrims she'd settled near after her husband died. Her farms produced while her neighbors fought against rocky ground, dry spells, and floods. By the time of the witch trials, she'd gotten so rich that she only dealt in rare birds. Through the reach of the British Empire and her wealth, she managed to import exotic birds and make a lot of money. All the while, she was cursed by her jealous neighbors. They spat at her, slandered her, and before long she was that kooky old bird lady who lived nearby. Despite all this, anyone who knew her was never able to convict her of witchcraft. She was too powerful for anyone to go against her. At this point in the story, I was already getting tired. Warren dove through my yawn. "So, what happened?" my brother inquired hungrily. "Oh, right," I snapped back to attention. "They cut her," I explained. "Her neighbors cut her up for the birds, not little birds, but the vultures and whatever, as if she was carrion. They sliced her deep, all over, with dirty knives, you know. She just had to lay there in the sun while she got pecked to death." The mythology I had created was grotesque. I still don't know where in my dark little mind it had been drawn from. Warren's enraptured gaze almost made me forget that I was making this story up as I went along. But before she died, I told him gravely, she cursed them all back. She promised she would come with the birds and eat them like worms. The birds that sing when the sun comes up. The other settlers didn't believe her at first. Then, kids started disappearing. Kids who were sent out to do farm work at sunrise. Every time the sun came up, another settler child would go missing. Now my brother's eyes were saucers. See, she couldn't hurt them in the dark. Her curse was to come with the morning birds and eat them like worms. The early bird catches the worm, right? Warren trembled. So what did they do? I closed my sketch pad and did my best impression of a caring brother as I put a hand on Warren's shoulder. They stayed in the dark, I told him. And if they had to go out at sunrise, they said, "Early bird, early bird, I am not your worm." As it happened, that twisted little story I made up on the fly killed my sister. I fell asleep on my childhood bed. There was only darkness, so it came easily. As was my habit, however, I found myself jittery and very much awake around dawn. I performed my usual yawn and stretched as I looked at the sunrise through the window. Articulate as I may be in the courtroom, I can't really convey through words what compelled me to run out into the backyard as I did that morning. All I can say is that it happened, and what follows is my best recollection of it. My feet stung as they crushed frostbitten strands of grass. If asked why I was sprinting across my parents' property, I would have had no explanation. Nevertheless, I found myself atop a sheer boulder on the edge of the ravine. That very ravine where my sister died. Standing there, I finally discerned that I was greeting the sunrise. Sunrise was the enemy I'd created for Warren. Yet I felt drawn to it. All those years of torment I'd put him through suddenly vanished, and I found myself face to face with the rising sun. Then I heard the crackling of fallen leaves being stepped upon. Rationally, I should have expected one of my parents to be the source of the noise, but my gut chilled and my heart raced. In spite of all logic, I knew that whatever had approached me from behind was dangerous. I turned slowly. What I saw still clenches at my insides at night. Not because it was scary. I like scary. It haunts me because it was my creation. I'd locked eyes with the early bird. She resembled my drawing down to the last detail, a human-esque woman with stringy, wet hair and huge, bulbous eyes. The wings that sprung from her back were a perverse combination of bird and bat. They looked more like punishments than appendages. Then there was the beak. Just as I had sketched, her face was a contorted meld of human-like flesh and the rigid countenance of a falcon. Thin lips seemed to be painted on the beak's edges. I was frozen. This had to be a nightmare. What other explanation could there be? She stalked towards me, her motions simultaneously elegant and nauseating. As she approached my shaking form, I noticed something. Her beak was dripping. It would have been bad enough had the droplets been blood. But as she moved closer, I realized that what dripped from her mouth wasn't actually liquid. The fleshy strings were worms, some of them still moving. Resigned to the notion that this was either a nightmare or the devil coming to take me to hell, I remained still. The early bird's wiry hand shot up and gripped me by the jaw. She forced me to look straight at her, into those nebulous eyes. It was then that I noticed they were green. Her mop of soaking hair would have been blonde, if dry. I was forced to my knees by this abomination I'd created as a surly teenager. Her aquiline face drew into mine as tears ran down my cheeks. Her steel grip forced my mouth open, and before I could even understand what was happening, those worms were being poured down my throat. The early bird was force-feeding me a mass of wriggling, tiny life forms. As she regurgitated the spineless little creatures into me, the early bird made eye contact. Those green orbs, devoid of anything recognizably human, locked with my own. Then I was somewhere else. I was back in my bedroom, the one I'd shared with Warren. But this wasn't the present. I wasn't sleeping on a twin bed as a 30-something staying overnight at my parents'. I was floating above it, like a ghost, or maybe an angel if you're an optimist. The 14-year-old version of me slept soundly. As for Warren, he trembled, wide awake and peering through the window. Outside, the blackness softened into blue and swirled into purples and oranges. As the pale sun first made its presence known, Warren looked over to my sleeping figure. His face grew hard with determination. Then I was somewhere else. Emma's room. My sister was just as I remembered her. She was wearing a pink t-shirt with a red heart stitched onto it. I would have cried if I'd had actual eyes. But no. Whatever this was, I was a spectre, simply observing. Emma stirred a little, restless with the pains of puberty, I imagine. She happened to glance out her window. Through it, she saw Warren. He was sprinting through the frostbitten grass just as I had done. Emma threw off her duvet and ran down the stairs. It was at this moment in the vision that I started to get sick. Everything started to come together. Hovering over them like a hummingbird, I was forced to witness what transpired on that horrible morning. Warren was at the edge of the ravine, atop the very rock where the early bird had sprung upon me. His chest puffed out with more courage than I'd ever seen him muster. My little brother cried these words out to the rising sun. Early bird, I am not your worm. I felt an eerie sort of pride at that. The 10-year-old version of my brother had taken it upon himself to confront his fears. In a better world, my ethereal vision would have ended there. Emma ran at Warren, full of sisterly concern. He was, after all, standing on the most precarious ledge of our beloved ravine. A fall from there would be deadly. She called his name. Warren! Warren! Then I was inside Warren's scared little mind. Shouting at the sun had been a victory, but now he heard a high, screeching voice. He did not hear Warren, Warren. He heard worm, worm. Mere seconds after he'd faced up to the nightmare I'd so sadistically forced upon him, my little brother was convinced that a monster was coming to eat him. Warren ran, never looking back to see that the monster was simply Emma, trying to protect him. I wanted this vision to end. I didn't want to see what happened next. I already knew. Emma was running full tilt towards Warren as she yelled, no doubt worried that he was about to jump. Her momentum couldn't be stopped when my little brother sprang off and into the nearby woods. My sister stumbled. She fell. You already know the rest. I saw it all happen, but I won't recount it. It was bad enough to know what she suffered. It was far worse to witness it. Only when Emma landed in the stream was I released from the nightmare. I was lying on the rock. The early bird was nowhere to be seen. I was unhurt as far as I could tell. There were no worms wriggling inside me. My dad called from the back porch. "What the hell are you doing, Mike?" Fuck visiting hours. I'm sure I broke the speed limit several times on the way to the home. I marched in, forgetting the mud and leaves that still clung to me after my strange morning excursion. "Sir, we aren't allowed visitors until 9 a.m., the courteous old bitch at the front desk told me. I leaned down, tears in my eyes, venom in my voice. "Ma'am, if you don't let me see my brother right now." "What's happening here?" It was Rhoda, Warren's caretaker. She pulled me away from reception. "What are you doing?" she asked, with a firm grip on my arm. I sniffed and tried to compose myself. I just need to see Warren, okay? Rhoda sighed. "Why the big fuss? He hasn't done anything different today since yesterday." "I know," I told her. "But there's something I need to talk to him about. Something that I didn't realize was important until now." Rhoda regarded me with a skeptical eye. Can't blame her for that. "Come on, I'll take you to your brother. God knows he's already awake anyway." Warren was in his wheelchair, facing the window. As per usual, he didn't react when Rhoda led me in. She told me to keep it quick and left us to ourselves. I pulled up a stool to sit across from Warren as he gazed into the sunlight. "Hey, bud," I probed. No reaction. I sighed. I had absolutely no idea how to approach this, so I opted for the straightforward route. "You remember the early bird? That story I told you? The drawing I did?" For maybe the first time in years, I saw Warren respond. It wasn't much, just a twitch in his face. It revealed little, but it told me what I needed to know. He understood. I buried my face in my hands as if I could force the tears back into my skull. "So, you understand? Jesus Christ. You understand what happened to Emma?" Getting even that small sentence out was painful, but I wasn't prepared for the outcome it had incited. "I killed her," Warren said softly. His shaggy hair flopped over his wet eyes and his unshaven chin trembled. To my knowledge, these were the first words my brother had spoken in years. All that silence, all those quiet days, and the first thing he said was a proclamation of guilt. It was an unjustified guilt. I comprehended that, even if Warren couldn't. What happened was a horrible accident. The only guilty party was me. A bully who had tormented someone he was supposed to love. Tormented him to the point of psychosis. All over a hall light being left on. "You didn't kill her," I whimpered back. "You didn't do anything wrong." Warren finally met my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time that happened. I realized that his eyes were green. His hair blonde, just like Emma. I don't know why I never really noticed that. I gripped my brother's hand and returned his gaze. Amazingly, he spoke again. Early bird, early bird. My voice trembled, but I managed to reply. You are not my worm. The Early Bird by Taylor Allgood. Taylor Allgood's work has been featured on the No Sleep podcast, and he himself is a sometimes guest on the Short and Spooky podcast, a comedy horror review of anthology horror TV series from the 80s and 90s. Taylor is a native of the Pacific Northwest who now resides in San Francisco. When he can be pulled away from his job in the tech industry, he's typically daydreaming of new ways to frighten readers. Oh, he also featured in the magazine Bad Futurist. Well, there you go. You know, we've been receiving such lovely feedback from you of late, gentle listener. Your kind words, suggestions, and in the case of good folks such as Mr. Allgood, submissions are most welcome. There are various ways of making contact with us. Our Nocturnal Transmissions website's contact form, for instance. Our direct email, noctranspodcast@gmail.com. Patreon messaging, Facebook, Instagram, even the comments section on our YouTube channel. We just love to hear from you through whatever means you choose. Now, I wasn't going to do this, but, oh dear, gentle listener, I just can't stop myself. One of our favourite bits of feedback came from Mark R. Patterson in response to our episode featuring Between the Pilings. Hello, Mark. I do hope you're listening. You wrote, "How long do you read, study, and run the lines or whatever for a reading like this? It's obvious you didn't roll out of bed one morning and decide to read and record this. This is just so excellent. The work shows. You should buy yourself something nice." Well, what a lovely thing to say. You know, our humble narrator didn't follow your advice at the time, but he's going to make up for it now by buying a Ponyo the Carpathian Hellhound Appreciation Society t-shirt from the Nocturnal Transmissions Redbubble store. Thank you for your kind words, Mark. They continue to inspire. Now, let's meet our new acolytes. The latest lovely listeners to join the ranks of our Patreon acolyte level are Beverly Varner, Stephanie Capalbo, Daniel Johnson, Dame of the Dead, Tuesday Marie, Thomas Francis Jones, formerly a minion, but he is so much more than that now. Wonderful to see you rising through the ranks, my dear. And last but not least, Anthony Morey. Welcome, Anthony. Welcome all. Now, of course, the highest of our ranks is the mighty cohort. Only a few dedicated keepers of the dark flame sit in that august company. I am very excited to announce that another bold individual joins that veritable pantheon this month. Eugene Petrie. Hello, Eugene, and thank you for your generous contribution to our dark arts. Your largesse is deeply appreciated. All right, that about does her. This episode was brought to you with the generous assistance of our Patreon subscribers. A particular thank you goes out to our esteemed cohorts. Eugene Petrie, of course, Evan Dooley, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, Sam Bell, Michael Wood, Chris McCauley, Alex Brewis, Alicia Townsend, Stephanie Saloka, Shell, JB, Z, Adam, and Rachel Brown. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle